When Stanley Kubrick's The Shining was first released, critics really just didn't like it. They thought it was a poor adaptation of Stephen King's novel. It wasn't exciting, it was overly long, and the characters felt cold and disconnected from each other. This disappointment led to 2 Razzie nominations for Worst Director and Worst Actress. But over time, public opinion on the piece changed, and it's now held up as one of the best horror movies ever made. While admittedly the characters do feel disconnected from one another, that only adds to the feeling of isolation, and Kubrick's creative choices create a consistently eerie sense of dread, making The Shining more like an unsettling nightmare you can't escape than any traditional scary movie. But it's impossible to imagine the film being anywhere near as iconic without Jack Nicholson's haunting performance.
And you go mad with realism, and then you come up against someone like Stanley who says, yeah, it's real, but it's not interesting.
By 1980, Nicholson was already a bona fide Oscar-winning movie star, but despite the challenging roles he'd already overcome, it was now at the age of 43 that he would be pushed to new limits and forced to conjure up something unrepeatable. Kubrick's movie took a full year to shoot, and the exceptionally long work hours and constant rewrites frustrated the star because anything they prepared would be out the window by the next day. He was at the mercy of the director's vision, and Stanley's feedback could be famously blunt.
I still think you shouldn't jump on every single emphatic line. It looks fake. Every time he speaks emphatically, you're jumping and it looks funny.
But Jack just gave himself to the process and said that he actually prefers to put his trust in the director, as that way his work doesn't become one note. He stated, "When I come up against a director who has a concept that maybe I don't agree with it, maybe I just hadn't thought of it or whatever, I'd be more prone to go with them than my own because I want to be out of control as an actor. I want them to have the control. Otherwise it's going to become predictably my work." And this definitely shines through in his performance, as yes, sometimes the characters do feel cold and disconnected, but the overall piece creates a tone that you won't find anywhere else in Nicholson's filmography. So let's take a deeper look at the finer details of this performance that made it so memorable from start to finish. Now for this particular role, I think it's best if we look at the little nuances that consistently pop up throughout the movie, and then after that's established, we can see how Nicholson infuses them all together in some of the most famous sequences. So here we go. The Overlook Hotel is the real main character in Kubrick's film. The family are mere ants existing between its walls. Therefore, Jack's performance has to be big and over the top, as subtlety can't be seen or heard in a setting like this. You have to lash out to be noticed. So Jack's physicality is wide and exaggerated throughout. For instance, in the moments when he's in the presence of ghosts, we can notice his arms are widely outstretched, displaying that he's vulnerable and open to being corrupted. He also uses a lot of animated hand gestures. Like when he's berating Wendy for interrupting him while he's writing. Here Jack makes his anger feel more alive by physically tapping the typewriter to sample the sound that signals he needs to be left alone.
You hear me typing.
Then we can see him do something similar when he signals to Lloyd to refill his glass. Similar to how any of us might mutter or hum when we're alone, Jack is so isolated that he has no reason to not indulge in these hand gestures even when he's talking to himself. With these aggressive movements, Jack is showing all the signs of abusive behavior, even physically reliving the exact motions of the last time he hurt his son. This gives the viewer the unshakable impression that it's just a matter of time before he snaps again. To add to that uneasy feeling, Jack chooses to consistently smile while he's explaining his violent actions. This is a real key to the performance, as the character almost never smiles except when he's angry or certain descriptions escape his lips. For instance, does this look like the appropriate face of a man stating, "I did hurt him once, okay?" in regards to hurting his own son? No, it's offbeat. Then he continues justifying the crime, calling it a momentary loss of muscular coordination with this playful smile still on his lips. The whole display is just wrong, it's upside down. His emotional reactions aren't matching his words. But what makes Nicholson such a special talent is how unflinchingly raw he's willing to be. He's never trying to look good or preserve a polished image. It's a very oral performance. If he's not drizzling drool after a nightmare, he's constantly playing with his mouth and tongue. These salivating movements give the character this lustful energy, but as a struggling alcoholic, he's not just thirsty for a drink, he's thirsty for blood. And finally, it's Jack's unbroken eye contact, as he does these long, penetrating stares with no blinking whatsoever that give us the impression he's being possessed. For instance, in this one long take, when he sits on the bed with Danny, Jack initially goes 42 seconds without blinking, as he doesn't even look at his son and just smirks to himself. But then he locks eyes with Danny, while telling him he hopes they can stay in the hotel forever and ever for a whopping 67 seconds, until Danny finally asks him the question that snaps him out of it.
You would never hurt Mommy or me, would you?
This shows us that the not blinking isn't an accident. It's a conscious decision by Jack so that he appears single-minded, and the blink is then timed with the music in the edit room. Nicholson appears to make a sustained effort to minimally blink throughout the movie, to the point no matter how unhinged he becomes, with his eyes bouncing around his skull, his eyes stay wide open, giving him this unstoppable energy, like no matter what you do, he's not going to snap out of it. So now that we understand the instruments Nicholson is using, let's see how he ramps it up in the most deranged scenes to capture pure mania. We'll start with the all work and no play scene. First, he emerges from the shadows, walking forward while gawking at his target with no blinking and this bizarre grin on his face. He asks, "What are you doing down here?" while planting his hand on the chair. Notice how this playful smile now makes us feel more uneasy, as Jack has already planted the seed that he only smiles when he's thinking about violence. So even though he has no weapon, the smile is subliminally communicating to us what's on his mind. Next, he uses his hands to flip through all the pages of deranged repetitive typing and then plants his fist down on the paper. So again, he's using violent motions with his hands. Now we see him stalk her around the room, and this is where the real skill kicks in. Jack starts angrily mocking Wendy by repeating everything she whimpers. But notice how no matter how angry he gets, he still doesn't blink.
As soon as possible! Jack!
This gives the scene a feeling of a predator approaching his prey, refusing to take his eyes off her for even a second. He has singular focus. Now he ramps up the violent body language even more. Like a wild ape, he's swinging and slamming his hands while still not blinking once. Next, she's walking backwards up the steps, swinging the bat at him, and Jack uses his hands to mime grabbing the weapon off her, completely fearless. It's important to note that he could be doing none of this and just approaching her with a blank expression, but instead so much is going on. And even though there's a bat swinging at him, where most people would intuitively flinch, Jack still doesn't blink. Then when he tells her he's not going to hurt her, he just wants to bash her brains in, he unleashes this big smile across his face, echoing what he's already set up earlier, how he can contrast the most horrible lines in history with this jack-in-the-box smile on his face. Then we see his arms outstretched again, wide and taking up space as he tells her to give him the bat. And out comes the bloodthirsty tongue in tandem with his welcoming fingers. So every aspect of his body language is just oozing bad intentions. We see this develop into the next famous scene, when Wendy locks Jack in the freezer. Kubrick's choice to film this from the ground up was brilliant, and the actor had to adapt by looking down near us instead of the height Wendy would actually be. But if we just look at his body language, he's automatically got one palm on the handle and the other one pressed against the door, so we can see every part of him wants to get out. And if she did unlock that door, he would be straight back attacking her. This adds an extra layer of tension and stakes. He's a wild animal pressing against his cage. Then as he hears his wife weeping outside, Jack starts thinking up ways to manipulate her into letting him out. But notice how the actor communicates his intentions to the viewer by glancing down at the handle while revving his body forward. So we know the moment he gets out, he's going to launch himself at her. His fingers then rotate around the handle from different angles, subtly communicating he's trying every possible avenue to escape. All of that sets the table for him to start playing the victim and pretending he needs her help. But when that doesn't work, and she says she's going to leave to go get help, he knows he's already sabotaged all communications. She's stranded here with no escape. So he now intensifies his hand gestures even more, pounding against the door like a deranged inmate.
Go check it out! Go check it out.
These vicious snarling breaths make him feel like a possessed demonic force, but then out comes the tongue again, making his murderous intentions all the more visceral. And this little gesture with his fingertips comes across like an artist sprinkling his finishing touches across his masterpiece of a plan. What's great about the behind-the-scenes footage is that it gives such clear insight into the filmmaking process, because as magical, scary, and intense as the shot in the movie is, once the take is over, Jack easily pulls himself back out of it and has to step over the camera operator and director hovering below. Luckily for us, for the final scene we're going to examine, we also have the privilege of seeing the real Jack rev himself up to get in the zone.
Die. Ex-murder kill.
The Here's Johnny scene is one of the most famous moments in cinema history, and it's impressive not just because the actor actually improvised the line, but because of how much it took to achieve. Surprisingly, Nicholson had actually worked as a volunteer fire marshal before, so he was an experienced axeman, and therefore found it far too easy to tear down the door. So the props department had to build stronger doors that he would struggle to break into, and he was then made chop through nearly 60 doors over 3 days until the director felt they had enough good shots to move on. It's hard to imagine how exhausting this would be, but it was worth it, as this scene is just pure insanity. As not only is Nicholson an impressive axe swinger, but notice how his face never loses focus. He still maintains this angry, demented expression once the axe lands, so that he never stops being a terrifying threat in every frame. However, in the moments just before he starts chopping down the bathroom door, it's the animated playfulness of the performance that proves the most unnerving. As once he discovers the door is locked, what does he do? Again, he taps on the door, mocking the idea that, hey, is anyone in there? When he has his victim cornered. And then his deranged pupils bounce back and forth in excited anticipation for what's to follow, with his tongue hanging out, ready to feast on the fruits of his labour. And of course he does all of this without blinking, as that way he feels completely detached from his own morality, from doubt, from consequence, from anything. He's just solely focused on killing those closest to him. The Shining is undeniably Kubrick's masterpiece, but it's also Jack Nicholson's masterclass in acting like an unhinged lunatic. Because to this day, 44 years later, no one else has quite managed to match his bloodthirsty energy, as he somehow managed to combine a confusing degree of playfulness with brutally violent body language and an unwavering gaze, creating some of the most electrifying moments of pure mania in cinematic history. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching, but if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing.